What's going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with another Pound for Pound ATL. Joined as always by my main man, Jonathan Holder. Jonathan, what's going on, brother?
Man, it is my Friday.
There you go.
I have a comp day at work tomorrow, so I get a 3-day weekend,
Man,
and yeah, I am super happy about that. Braves were winning, Falcons are looking good. It's a good time to be an Atlanta fan right now, as long as you're not into basketball, and then
kind of gets a little dicey there. Uh, but yeah, no, as far as what brings us here tonight is, like you said, it's a good time to be a Falcons fan. This is the first time me and you've gotten to really sit down since the draft has truly concluded. I mean, we
Mhm.
came together and talked for a little while the night the draft concluded, but now we've had a few days to process it. I even got to go on a little bit of a rant on Tuesday over some of the reactions that we were getting from fans and media outlets alike, uh, which is always fun and
Yep.
entertaining. I try not to do those very often. I try not to get sucked into that very often, but kind of let myself have a little bit of fun on that one. But since then, well, since we've gotten a chance to come together, the Atlanta Falcons have signed a handful of undrafted free agents,
Yep.
and we felt like we should probably, come together and talk about some of those guys. And not that any of these guys are a shoe in to make the roster, which seems like the first time in a few years that's been the case.
Yep.
Like this is actually the smallest number of undrafted free agents that I think we've signed in what about 4 or 5 years, right?
It's been a while, especially coming from Dimitrov, where we routinely had 10, 12, 15, 20 undrafted free agents. So yeah, it's crazy how little undrafted free agents, and then of course there's guys that we invited to rookie mini camp and things like that. But I don't think those guys are actually signed for anything.
No,
It's just
not
like,
yet.
hey, come in,
Right, just
and
come
if
on
we
in and
like you.
try out. Yep, and that's a couple of the XFL guys. There was a defensive back and a defensive tackle, I believe, like a nose tackle kind of guy. So,
Yeah.
which on a sidebar, I don't know how many of y'all have watched or paid attention to any of the XFL. I've watched them when I've had nothing else to do. And it's been enjoyable. It's been an enjoyable. I actually think in a lot of ways it's been a little bit better of a product than the USFL. Um, but that's just my opinion. Maybe it's the presentation seems a little bit better, and also the fact that they seem to be partnering with the NFL in a sense of some developmental type stuff, even with the way their contracts are structured. That at the end of the year, the XFL players can go sign with NFL players without and are able to get out of their contracts real easy. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed that, and two of the guys that you were talking about have been invited from the XFL. I'm gonna try to see if I can pull their names real quick.
We
Uh,
got Ikena Nchukwu, edge out of Rice.
no, I'm talking about the XFL guys.
Oh,
These
I'm
guys,
sorry.
yeah, these
All
guys, I got their names pulled up because
right.
let's see. I'm trying to scroll through uh,
I remember one guy. He was like number
Falcons Twitter.
25. Number 25 out of, I can't remember what team it was.
They're both out of the Seattle Battlehawks.
That's it. The Battlehawks.
Yeah, they're both out of the Battlehawks. Let's see here. Give me 2 seconds on this. Okay, so one of them, the Falcons are bringing in offensive tackle Barry Wesley,
Okay.
who's of the Battlehawks as well. And trying to see if I can find. There's a defensive back and a nose tackle, and then that offensive tackle. Either way, all right. Their names are. It's not. as important or as big a deal. I'm not trying to derail the show just for that. Should have had that ready, but I didn't. Check me out, Mister Prepared, as they call me. But now
Absolutely.
on to the undrafted free agents. You got Mike Jones out of LSU, and then you got which was a perfect opportunity for you to go who. That was the
Who?
you missed the joke. And I would have been like Mike Jones. Anyway, doesn't matter.
I
So
saw
you
I
got,
saw that I saw that on Twitter, and it just like it went over my head even then.
even
So
then, my
even
gosh,
then.
my gosh, John Boy. I mean, I know you're a metalhead and all, but I figured you would at least have gotten caught up in some rap. Anyway, no, doesn't matter.
God.
Then okay, so he's linebacker out of LSU. Nothing super spectacular. This linebacker class in general wasn't very like high, wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Since like you got Jack Campbell in the first round, so a guy like Mike Jones doesn't necessarily move the needle unless he can provide something as far as like gunner goes on special teams. Defensive end slash tackle is the guy that you were talking about. You go ahead and try to say that you're better at pronouncing names than I am.
Ikenna and Chukwu.
Sure.
I think I think
Out of
that's
Rice.
as close as I can come.
He was projected as a like priority free agent. Had like 4.5 sacks last year out of his 13 starts. Nothing like super impressive, just very like push straight forward. He's got the NFL size and frame that you want, but
Mhm.
he just doesn't have the overall athleticism. Um, so unless Ryan Nielsen sees something in him, I don't see him sticking, past camp really.
It's the so like one of the things that at least I used a ton in the lead up to the draft was draft buzz like NFLdraftbuzz.com. I
Right.
use that a ton. It was a great site for like helping me to like see some things about guys that maybe I didn't necessarily notice, go back, watch film, and then I notice it,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And it's a great resource to use. Problem is, every single guy that's an undrafted free agent that we picked up, I went to go look for them there. And every single time I was like,
Nope.
you are joking.
Nope.
Who are you talking
Who
about?
are you talking about?
Yeah, so I'm like, all right, well, there goes my crutch.
Yeah, right.
I need to go
That's
figure
all
something
good.
else out.
I mean, for the most part, these guys, like as we kind of stated at the top of this, I think this will be the first time in a long time we're not relying on an undrafted free agent to actually make the team.
Yeah.
So these guys they have taken a flyer on. Two of the guys are speedsters, and that's the Xavier Malone out of. Let me see if I can get this one right. Out of no, what is the name of this college?
Let's see.
The Henderson State Athletics. Henderson State is where he played ball at. And then you have Killian Harris,
Yep.
who is also a speedster out of Oklahoma Baptist University. So
That
these guys,
powerhouse.
oh yeah, right, the powerhouse. Everybody knows of Oklahoma Baptist. But
Yeah.
these guys are like these two dudes are jitterbugs in a sense of like the shifty speed guys, which we obviously didn't draft a wide receiver in this draft. So, as we transition here in a minute to be talking about like the roster itself, a lot of ways you could point at wide receiver as being like the biggest like glaring hole still,
Yeah.
and especially like speed for the wide. We Arthur
If you,
Smith talked about wanting to get explosive. You
Mhm.
did that with Bijan Robinson in a sense, but you didn't necessarily add speed in the receiving room.
Right. And if you're big into like RPGs, whether that's playing on console, PC, whatever, uh think of the wide receiver position as the dump stat of this roster is what it sounds like to me. Because they didn't address it in the draft. They addressed it in free agency as far as they got a couple of guys
Yeah,
that are guys that can contribute, but nothing like no splash signing in those areas. And then again, you didn't really touch the wide receiver room again until you got to undrafted free agents.
Right.
So this is that's why I'm in my mind I'm thinking like, what's a good analogy here? This is like essentially the dump stat
Right.
for the roster. When we talk about like the roster makeup, like what we look for in in 12 personnel and 22 personnel and different things like that. I actually think like I have an idea. Now I could be completely wrong. I have an idea why that might be the case.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we'll get into that here in a minute. I want
so,
to touch on one more undrafted free agent who I actually think might have a chance to make the roster, only because he seems to fit Arthur Smith's like body type as far as receivers goes, and that's Justin Marshall out of Buffalo. He stands 6'3", 213 pounds. Uh, Bigger guy, played his first 3 years at Louisville. Didn't really make much of an impact there, only had one touchdown. And this is my only worrisome. Like, I don't know if that was just the style of offense, Malik Cunningham, what have you. But then he transfers to Buffalo, so he goes down in competition, and then racks up 837 yards and 9 touchdowns. And I briefly watched some like a highlight clip. I guess you could say that's about all you're really going to find on these guys, if you can even find that. And he's definitely like the most NFL looking player on that field.
yeah,
So the fact that he was actually able to have some production there shouldn't be surprising. So I'll be interested to see. Like, he's a guy who I'm going to look to see if he can like make an impact when camp comes around.
yeah,
But I, to be honest, I don't really expect any of these guys to make it through camp, because I can't see where any of these guys are going to give you more than Jared Bernhardt gave you last year, or they're like a 2 year in Jared Bernhardt, or even a 3 year in Frank Darby at this point.
yeah.
Unless they just come in and absolutely blow doors, I just don't see any of them
I mean,
making it.
what was the name of Cruz, wide receiver for the Giants?
Oh no,
Like,
not Nelson Cruz.
no,
It was,
it's
I know who you're talking about.
the wide receiver
I say you're gonna have to
Giants.
Google it, because if you don't, it's gonna bug me.
Cruz, uh, Victor Cruz.
Victor Cruz,
That
that's it.
like they would have to come in and basically pull a him
Right.
to probably make this roster, um, simply because the like it's not just the wide receiver room. Right now, Mac Hollins is not going anywhere. Scotty Miller's not going anywhere. Uh,
Neither is Cadell
uh,
Hodge, for that matter,
Kadar
because
Hodge is not going
Hodge,
anywhere.
yeah, he
Special
gives
teams
you something
ace.
else. Right, he gives you something on special teams, and like I said, unless one of these guys can come in and just absolutely supplant Bernhardt or Darby, I just don't see him
No,
making headway.
I think their best shot to make the team is not
Uh-huh.
even really make the team. I think their best shot is looking to try to get on, like, impress enough to get on the practice
Right.
squad to
Yep.
try to develop into something that they'd be willing to bring up to the main team.
Yep. Exactly. All right, so let's move into, like, we now get a real good fresh look, coming off the draft and everything else. For the most part, unless something crazy happens, the 53 men who are going to field this team are going to field the Atlanta Falcons in 2023 are already on this team, right? At
Yep.
this point, unless something crazy happens. So let's take a look at some of the like early things. Okay, like of what the roster composition it might look like. I put this out on Twitter, but I mainly made it for our show tonight. Um, Obviously, the starting five on the offensive line, as represented here by the graphic, unless you're starting with Jake Matthews. Obviously, I think he's a stalwart. He's locked, in my
Yes.
opinion. Now you get into Matthew Bergeron, who they traded up for in the second round. Um, that was the only position that they didn't really address in free agency, was the left guard position. So you had a feeling maybe they were going to roll with Hennessy. I don't think they roll with Hennessy. Not after you basically, that man represents 2 draft picks,
Yep.
a second and a fourth. So that's a good bit of capital. Um, so I think he's your starting left guard.
Unless
And
he
then,
just unless he just absolutely like pulls a Mayfield,
right,
essentially.
right. Unless he pulls a Mayfield, I think he's your starting left guard. And then you got Drew Dahlman, who, as we've stated it more than once, by the end of the season, the coaching staff was really liking how he was coming along. So the idea that Drew Dahlman is your starting center shouldn't really shock anybody.
Yeah.
Then obviously we go with the most expensive right side in the NFL with Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarrett, right?
Well, I mean, I don't Caleb. I was complete to be completely honest with you. I was shocked at what we were able to pay McGarry to come
Oh
back.
yeah, no. I'm not saying like I don't think he was too expensive at all. I'm just more or less talking about you sunk a lot of money into the right side of that line,
Yeah, you did.
so that's your starting right side. Now gets into the fun part. I think when we go back and look at it, I still think at the end of the day, 11 personnel is probably going to reign supreme. But last year we tended to like 27% 12 personnel versus like 33% 11. So I could see it now with Janu Smith in the fold trending more towards 12 personnel being
Mhm.
the base of this offense, which is how I have this constructed. So in 12 personnel, you have Kyle Pitts and Janu Smith as your starting tight ends. Because you remember back in was it the way the depth chart was laid out in 2021 or 2022, they had two tight ends listed as starters.
Yep.
So I think that goes forward. You have two
Oh
tight
yeah.
ends listed as starters, and it's Janu Smith and it's Kyle Pitts, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Kyle Pitts is your chess piece. You move him all over the formation, trying to get him matchups. I actually think you're going to see him less blocking than you did last year because you brought in Janu. Because I think Janu gives you what you're really looking for in that second tight end. Guy who can block, guy who can do is a versatile player.
Mhm.
On the outsides, obviously you got Mac Hollins and Drake London. Those guys are going to be Drake London, especially lined up all over the place, whether it's slot, whether it's outside. Arthur Smith is really pushing towards a positionless offense
Yep.
and positionless football, and I think you're going to see it. Like if you haven't had a chance to listen to like I think it was called like the Athletics podcast with Nate Tice and Robert Mays. They had a like a message podcast in the sense of what does the draft say? What are the teams trying to tell us by the way they drafted and stuff like that? And Nate Tice is like he's one of the only talking heads that I have heard really talk about the positionless football.
Yep.
And I couldn't agree more,
Yeah.
with
Absolutely.
what you have here. Obviously, I think you got Bijan Robinson as your starting tailback. You don't draft a guy 8 overall to not be your starter. Like I know a lot of people are going to be like, "Oh, what about Algier?" Algier's still going to get his carries,
Yep.
but I think Bijan's your starter, and obviously Desmond Reader as your QB. You see anything any different in this scenario, John?
No, no. The only like I mean, this if we're talking about you know this the with this personnel, I think this is at what now you may have Janu out in the slot and Pitts in line, or you might, and then you can also just all of a sudden spread it out and have four wides.
Oh yeah,
You could bring it real down and get it all compact. And Mac Hollins and Drake London, those guys are good blockers. Johnny Smith's a good blocker. Pitts is a better blocker than he was his rookie year, and I fully believe he'll get better this year. So I mean, this is a pretty big lineup to be able to run the football out of. That can also spread out wide and really stretch you thin on and even then you can run out of it with like draws and just other things
crosses
like
and things
that
of that nature.
to allow your running back who's really good in space, get him one on one with some guys, and he's going to really hurt. the opposing defense. It's just a lot of times he's going to make somebody miss.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he had the most what was it, most missed tackles or like
Yep.
forced missed tackles last
Over the last
season.
2 years.
Yeah, over the
Like
last
over the
2 years.
last, yeah, if you go over, like he had the most last season, but if you go over the last 2 years combined, he's got I don't know the number, but he's got the most amount of missed tackles
Right.
created by a running
Right.
back in college football.
The one thing I'll say here before we move on to the next slide is I think like you're going to get 12 personnel, but you may also like take out um, Janu for Parker Hesse at times, and
Yep.
even Kyle Pitts for Parker Hesse at times, depending on what you want to do blocking wise. But now, speaking of that, we'll go into what is going to be 13 personnel, which um, Arthur Smith is going to run quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Last year they ran it with, even with Kyle Pitts out, they ran it with Ferkser, Michael Pruitt, and Parker Hesse. So the difference here is I think you drop off Mac Hollins and you bring in Parker Hesse.
Yep.
I have it set up in almost like a pistol type type situation
Mm-hmm.
because they use that formation quite a bit, and I don't think it's going to really go anywhere. I think it allows them to let the quarterback see the field a little bit better, be a little bit more deceptive, which way the back is going to come out. Uh, you don't really tip your hand if you're offset one way or the other. You tend to tip your hand on which way the run is going to go, and where Arthur Smith wants to be creative is in movement and deception and things like that, formation wise.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in uh, 13 personnel, I think that's what you're kind of looking at there, with Drake London being the only true like receiver on the
Yeah.
field. But even in this scenario, you could leave Parker Hesse in as uh, the protector and split Robinson out and go four wide. You could do a 2-by-2 with, Hessian as, the running back or the protector, right?
Yep.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah. Like so far, both of these groupings that we've shown, you could both of these can be either power run. They can be, you can go to the left, you can go to the right. Uh, that can, if things, matchup wise with personnel on the defense, if, if Ritter is looking out at it and it looks good for the run, then you roll with it. If it looks like, hey, they're gearing up for the run, let's spread them out a little bit, make an audible, can immediately go out to a four wide type of scenario while still having a protector, like you said,
yep,
to try to take advantage of some of the matchups there. Because you put Bijan Robinson against just about any, with the exception of like the very best linebackers out there, very best coverage linebackers. You put him out there against a linebacker, he's going to eat up whoever they put up against.
yep.
Um,
Yep. And like right now, there isn't a ton of Luke Kuechly's in the league.
no,
So outside of like going against somebody like that, I think that Bijan, like,
Warner.
right, Fred Warner was one I could think of. Maybe uh, maybe Parsons, but he said he's going to be switching more towards like defensive end. So
He's going to bulk up,
yeah,
is
so
my understanding.
he might lose some of his athleticism in that sense. But anyway, none of like we saw today. I don't know if any of y'all saw. We saw clips of like Bijan's been training with Jamar Chase
Yep.
already, so that's like he really takes pride in catching the
He,
ball.
he apparently he's been doing that since like he's been training with them even before the draft, like
Mm-hmm.
right after the combine. Might even been before the combine. I'm not 100%, but I know he's been training with them for a while. Those are guys that train like Jamar Chase, obviously, but guys like Odell Beckham
Right.
and guys like that. So he's definitely trying to get his footwork right, trying to maybe learning some new things here and there, but just trying to like already before he's even signed his thing before he's even gone to any rookie mini camps, before he's
Anything.
gone to any OTAs. He's out there working on it, and it's just a beautiful thing to see.
It is very much so. So now, for all y'all who are asking, the last one we want to look at is the 22 personnel. Obviously, with Kyle
Yep.
Pitts and Janu Smith, Drake London's back on the field. And then in this particular scenario, I have Bijan in the slot with Algier in the back. But, I mean, you could just as easily have, Algier and Bijan bracketing uh, Drake, or not Drake, Desmond Ritter.
Yep.
So I just drew it with Bijan in the slot, as in, kind of giving that, representation. But just in these three formations alone, you could see a lot of different versatility and a lot of different fluidity that you can roll with, especially if you catch the defense in a situation that you like and you really want to go tempo. With these guys, the versatility that they have, you can really start pushing it. Because I'd be hard pressed to think that Tyler Algier would be against being a lead blocker as well for Bijan.
No, and that's my thought is like you come out with this personnel package, you probably line up in like an I formation. You at least get it in their head that Algier can and will be a fullback in that particular situation. So you make them believe it.
Right.
Once you get them believing it, now you start making it. You start showing that same look, and then when they start seeing that personnel, then they're like, okay, they're we need to make sure that we can defend the run. So we start putting out some more linebackers, things like that. And as soon as you catch them in that kind of personnel, you start going up tempo. You start spreading out Bijan to the slot. Now you got Bijan and or Janu Smith probably having a linebacker on him. That's a mismatch on either one of them.
Yep.
And then worst case scenario, you got Algier, probably as your protector initially, and then leaking out as your safety valve. And he's a guy that, while he's not going to give you Bijan out of the backfield catching it, he's a guy that can catch the ball, can give you some positive yardage on a play where nothing else is there.
That's it.
And that's what you want to have.
And that's the goal moving forward, I would imagine, is to push for the versatility.
Yep.
That's something you're going to hear us talk about a lot as the, off season, moves along, is the fact that you can do so much. I mean, they even had, like, in his best years, Janu Smith lined up as a running back and took a handoff 61 something yards.
Yep.
So that's not out of the realm of possibility. So I'm pretty sure UD would even feel comfortable having Janu as the uh, lead blocker on a particular situation. He had some of his best blocking under Arthur Smith. So
Yep.
for the most part, like, I didn't put Scotty Miller on here and I didn't put Cordell Hodge on here because I think those guys, as we saw last year, the second and or the third and fourth wide receiver, which ends up being the fourth, fifth, sixth option in this offense, probably isn't going to get a ton of run. It's going to be more of a matchup scenario if they get something they like as far as Scotty Miller is concerned. Um, but I just don't see them getting like a ton of run. Obviously, in three wide, like 11 personnel, you're obviously going to have Scotty Miller out there. Um,
Yeah.
so you're still going to see him quite a bit.
Yep.
All right. Last but not least, we're going to swap over to the defensive side of the ball. Now, here's a deal where this is like rotation central. Okay. And this is what I'm thinking right now before we ever get to camp. This is not accounting for what I think is going to be the biggest battle. We'll get to that in a second. So we'll start with the defensive line. These are Calais Campbell, Grady Jarrett, and David Onyemata. What I'm calling the right side of that line is set in my mind. Now, on the other side of David Onyemata is where I start to get a little sketchy. Like, is it going to be Ogundeji? Does he even make it through camp?
No,
Is it going to be like right here? I have Arnold Ebiketie.
I think they want it to be him.
Right,
Okay, but I could see that being Ebiketie. I could see that being Dupree. I could see
right.
that being Malone in some situations, probably depending on the team we're facing, the size of the tackles that they're going against, what they like to do in
You
those
also got
situations.
like Lorenzo Carter.
Yep.
Like I wonder. Like I really wonder if Lorenzo Carter and uh, Malone morph more into like Sam linebackers
Yeah,
versus. So when you do put a third linebacker on the field, that isn't one of those two guys. Uh,
I think obviously if you've got those other three guys on the field, Calais Campbell, Jarrett, Onyemata, whoever is left over, if there's going to be a guy that is going to drop back in coverage, it's going to be that guy. Whether and I think it's less likely if it's Bud Dupree, but if we're talking Ebiketie, Malone, Carter, maybe even in some situations you get Caden Ellis down there and actually get his hand in the dirt.
right.
I think those are the guys that if there's going to be a guy that's going to drop out, in coverage, then it's going to be one of those guys. Obviously, you're not going to put Calais Campbell out in coverage. I mean,
No,
very, very rarely, I don't think.
right. So it's going to be like I put it like the base defense as a 4-2-5, but that's because like the NFL runs nickel about 70 some odd percent of the time. But it's going to be really interesting how they deploy this defense. This is the part that I'm still like trying to figure out, trying to wrap my head around because I still don't think we have enough linebackers, like true linebackers. I know you got Michael Walker, but outside of Michael Walker, unless they decide to bring back Rashawn Evans, you're kind of thin there unless you're putting Malone or Carter as a linebacker, which would be interesting. Obviously, on the outside, you got AJ Terrell, and I think since with the release of Casey Hayward, I think Jeff Okuda takes the other side.
Yep.
Um, and I think we're going to play more man than we have played in the past, or at least the past couple years. So I think you like flip those guys wherever you need to flip them.
Yep.
Right now, I have Mike Hughes as your starting nickel, but that could easily, depending, that to me is going to be like the hottest like battle when we get to camp is that starting nickel position.
Yeah.
Whether it's Mike Hughes, whether it's D. Alford, whether it's the fourth round pick Clark Phillips, like that's going to be like they better be ready to come to fight, in my opinion.
I mean, if Clark Phillips, I'll even say this: if Clark Phillips plays as good as what I've seen on film, I haven't watched a ton on him, but what I've watched I've has been really good. Even when he's not like knocking down passes or intercepting the ball, even when the guys are catching the ball, he's generally there. Like
Right.
he's not just getting beat left and right. But if he comes in, uh, does what he's supposed to do, while he doesn't have the height that you want for a starting cornerback in today's NFL, I could absolutely see the guy like pushing Okuda for outside and pushing Okuda down inside potentially. I could see that happening because I just don't. I think their goal is Okuda to be on the other side of Terrell.
I think
I
so.
mean,
Yeah.
if the guy plays up to, can finally get around to playing up to his number 3 overall selection status, then, or it doesn't have to get to that point. He just has to be close. Like if he can get close to that, I think, yeah, he is going to be your guy opposite Terrell. But,
Yeah.
but I
I,
could absolutely see Clark Phillips pushing him for that spot.
yes, I could like the cornerback outside AJ Terrell, the cornerback's position, and with it being like the slot corner, and then the other side of Terrell is going to be a pretty interesting battle. By all accounts, Mike Hughes is more comfortable on the outside, so I'll
Yeah.
be interested to see if they Let him actually try to play some of the outside. Um, those two, like that secondary position is one that I am very intrigued by and excited to watch as we get into OTAs and mini camps and training camps, stuff like that. That's one of the ones, even though I admittedly don't necessarily understand it as much as I do other positions, it is definitely the area that I'm intrigued by.
And
Now in
that,
the middle,
well, and the other thing is, like, if Mike Hughes is a guy that feels more comfortable on the outside, and he shows that in practice, where he just doesn't not that he doesn't handle it, but he's just not quite as good out of the slot as he is on the outside. Then, in a situation where we have three cornerbacks on the field, if he's starting before Clark, Phillips, then I could see him being the outside opposite Terrell, and then Okuda moving inside as the slot if he can handle it in there.
yep.
So
Now,
there's
yeah,
all kinds of permutations we could potentially see.
right. And I think it has like they're definitely like betting on upside here on both of these guys. Both former first round picks.
Yep.
Both like I think Jeff Okuda is an ascending player. We might know what Mike Hughes is, but maybe in the scheme that Jerry Gray and Ryan Nielsen are cooking up, maybe it's a more cornerback friendly scheme. Who knows? Um, Now, if we go inside like the spine of the defense there, like in the middle, I think Troy Anderson, I think is like Ryan Nielsen already talked about being excited working with him. And then I think Caden Ellis is obviously your two starters there.
Yep.
Uh, Michael Walker, like really kind of started trending downwards towards the end of the season last year.
Started
Lost
out
his
with a bang
right, right,
in that New Orleans game.
right. He started out with a bang, but definitely kind of like started trending downwards to the point where he lost his mic responsibilities to Rashawn Evans, and then lost his job to Troy Anderson. The last 4 or 5 games of the season. So I expect Troy Anderson to take a step forward. I think what Caden Ellis brings, Troy Anderson can give you a lot of that same type stuff. I think those guys can be interchangeable. It's going to be interesting to see who Nielsen tabs to be the Demario Davis kind of guy, the one who does more of the coverage.
Yep.
Uh, because a lot of times it ended up looking like a 5-1-5 instead of a 4-2-5, like with Caden Ellis up at the line, and Mario Davis dropping into coverage. So we'll see how all that transpires. But I'm really excited to see what Troy Anderson brings this year.
Yeah, I hope I hope that he can turn the corner. Uh like he looks really good when he's heading down, when he's heading, north and south.
Right,
Looked really good doing that. There were times where he looked good in coverage, but there were other times in coverage where he just looked lost.
right,
And maybe that's just a byproduct of Dean P's his particular system, maybe being and it's notoriously a quite a complex system.
right,
So maybe that's just a problem for all but a handful of people to really understand the whole scheme. And maybe this particular defense that we're going to be running this year, whatever that is a slightly more just it's more in line with what you had when you had the Seattle, the Legion of Boom.
right.
Now, I'm not saying that we're going to go with
That simplistic of
that,
cover
that,
three and that's it.
but right, but having a defense that is good, but is also simple enough that guys don't think too much while they're playing. They're just reacting. They're just going.
Right,
And in that situation where you're not having to think about it. Now that could be for any kind of defense if you can grasp it, but the more streamlined and easier to grasp your defense is, the more you just rely on your guys' natural athleticism to take over. And if you can get to that point with a guy like Anderson, The guy's got all the tools. The guy's
Oh
got
yeah,
all the athletic promise that you could want. So if you can get to the point where he's just using that and not using this quite as much,
right.
and I think that, or just if you're able to, he's able to process it better, whatever that is,
No,
then I
yeah,
think that natural talent can really come to the surface, and he could be quite good, quite
yeah.
good.
I've got high hopes for Troy Anderson.
Yeah.
Now on the back end of the defense, obviously it is the $1 million man Jesse Bates and Richie Grant.
Yep.
No real shocker or surprise there. I
No.
think the presence of Jesse Bates is going to allow Richie Grant to play a little freer. If they do play a little more like going off of what they did quite a bit in New Orleans, if they do play some more like too high safety, I think Richie not having to be the solo deep man will
Yep.
be good. But also, I think just the presence of Jesse Bates is going to elevate the play of Richie Grant just on uh,
Yeah.
presence alone, really.
Yeah, in a single high situation, and I think he'll probably benefit from this. He'll become more of a robber safety. He'll move down a little bit closer, get into the intermediate area when it comes to coverage stuff, and then when it comes to run defense, he's definitely going to move down and be much more of a box safety
Right,
kind of a situation. But and then you got your two wide. And obviously, if you got your two deep scenarios, then you're only really worried about one half of the field. You're
right,
not necessarily worrying about the whole field, though. There are some concepts that an offense can run that can get you all crossed up if you're not paying attention. But at the end of the day, like, your main goal is, this is my side of the field. I just need to make sure whatever comes into my side, I need to make sure I'm taking care of it, and that should help him a lot when he
now
reads. So.
I definitely think that like we're talking about just one formation right now, which is like the 4-2-5. I think they're going to be like they've already said they want to be multiple. Every defense wants to be multiple. So you're going to see a heavy influx of, a heavier rotation, such as, getting guys like Lorenzo Carter in and Malone in. You're going to see a lot of big nickel, possibly with, Jalen Hawkins out there, or even some 3-3-5, type situation
Yeah,
where your nickel player might be, a linebacker or something of that nature. So I think the defense is still a interesting quagmire of like potential, and I'm really interested to see how they roll out now that all the draft and everything else is behind us. Like I'm really going to like try to dig into what New Orleans ran last year uh, and see if I can like start to glean what we might look at it, might want to run here in Atlanta, depending. Also, like look at like the coverage type schemes that Green Bay ran. I know that Jerry Gray is not the head of the like DBs. That's Steven Jackson, but as a defensive assistant, uh, and I think an assistant head coach, right?
yeah, I
Did
believe
he
so.
get that? Did he get that? They obviously value his input, and
Yes,
they're
yeah,
obviously wanting him to work with Nielsen as a first time DC. So you can't discount some of the things that he's done in his past. And I think like Big Nickel has been a big part of it. So it's going to be interesting to try it out. They didn't draft. I mean, they drafted a safety in the seventh, right? Or was that the fourth?
yes. No,
When did the Alabama? That was the
that was
seventh.
seventh.
Yeah,
Yeah, Helms.
Helms. So
Yeah.
like, does he come in and push the guy who they didn't draft, Jalen Hawkins, for that third safety position?
Which is like, it's kind of crazy. The fact is that Hellum, was the leading tackler for Alabama, which is
Right.
no small feat.
Nope.
Especially when you're talking about having guys like Jordan Battle and uh, Branch, having those guys out there, and this is this is still the guy that gets the most amount of tackles. He was a team leader, like a
Right.
cat. He was a captain for the team, and everything I heard about this kid. Um, and again, unfortunately, draft buzz
Failed
failed
you
me on
again.
that one. Failed me again. But everything I've read about this guy is like he not that he's going to come in and be like this revelation and push for like starting right away or anything like that. But like this guy is a really good just leader in general. He's a really good communicator. Um, and is going to come in and be a special teams ace if nothing else.
Right.
Uh, but like a lot of people were like they were surprised that he kind of was there in the seventh.
Right.
Thought he would go higher than that, and so yeah, he's kind of the guy that potentially could be a guy that we look at down the road and be like, man, I can't believe we only had to
Got him in a
use it,
seventh. You
only
know.
had to give up a seventh for him. So
Right.
uh, he's kind of probably the most. I think all of the guys we picked in rounds 1 through 4 are definitely guys that we are looking to have an impact this year. And I think that he's definitely the guy you could look back and say, oh, this guy was the diamond in the rough kind of a situation. Maybe not to the Grady Jarrett levels of diamond in the rough, but I can see him being a guy that you look back and say, man, I am so glad we were able to get him.
A guy we didn't even really even touch on, like as far as like rotational pieces goes, Zach Harrison. Like,
Yeah.
he's an athletic freak. He just hasn't necessarily put it all together. So it's going to be interesting to see. Like, picked in the third round, I don't think he's not going to have to be like relied on heavily. But if you're wanting to go, like he could in a way like make it a tough decision between him and Ogundeji. You know,
Yeah.
which is an interesting thought exercise to have there. So with that, with like this, like us going through the roster, like quickly in a sense, like the early roster projections, the early starters. We like I said, we haven't even gotten into camp or anything. What position would you like to see them add before we get to camp? Or do you think they will add like sometime either before or in camp?
So, I mean, it's out there and it's low hanging fruit. So I'll say it like Corey Davis.
Right,
I mean,
right,
I honestly, that's really the only spot that I could see where, but I'll, and I mentioned this earlier, didn't really bring it up a ton when we were looking at the formations. Again, I feel like wide receiver, if Mac Hollins, he doesn't even have to give us exactly what he gave the Raiders last year. If Mac Hollins comes in and gives us like 50 receptions for 600-700 yards and a handful of 3 or 4 touchdowns, and Scotty Miller can maybe give us like 40 to 45, maybe a little bit less than that, but can give us that, but can actually give us the threat of being being that guy that can take the top off the defense. If he can just make people have to worry about it, right? If that can happen, and then you talk about the main, just like you've talked about, like target 1, target 2, target 3, target 4. If you start looking at it like that, your target 1 could be anybody from Drake London to Kyle Pitts to Johnny Smith to Bijan Robinson. Those can be those. I think primarily when they're out on the field have potential to be target 1,
right,
and then you can be target 2, 3, 4, however you see fit. But those guys are going to do that. And if everything works out, we're talking health wise, we're talking these guys actually producing like we think they're going to. If all of that works out, then yeah, the wide receiver position is not as big a factor for you because what you have there is enough. And when you complement it with everything else, the 2 tight ends, your running back that is potentially an extra slot receiver,
right,
uh, all those things, then your wide receiver position can be your dump stat where you're not necessarily worried about making splash moves out there. Now, with that said, would I like to have Corey Davis? Absolutely.
heck yeah,
I would take him in a heartbeat in this in a Arthur Smith led offense. I would take it because he knows how to use
Yep.
it. And that I think that would just open up the offense even more potentially. So
Yeah, with the idea of Scotty Miller, like if he can give you what Zacchaeus gave you last year, 40 receptions, 533 yards with 3 touchdowns, I think
yep.
that'd be career year for him. But I think
I
that's exactly what you brought him in here to do.
If you can somehow early in the season get him behind a defense and hit him for a big gain, potentially even a touchdown. If you do that, let's say 2 or 3 times in the first quarter of the season, right? We'll say, even though technically it's not a quarter anymore, but the first 4 games of the season, if you can do that 2 or 3 times somehow, and now you have teams worried about him doing that to you.
Yep.
All right, he could do it maybe only 2 or 3 more times the rest of the season.
Yeah, but they got
But
to
if he
respect it.
but if he does it just often enough to where you have to think about it, now he steps on the field. Now you're like, okay, we got to make sure we're not getting beat deep here, and
Yep.
that's just one more thing that you got to worry about. So you got your deep threat over here. You got your potential deep threat in London. I see a lot of times people are like, this guy can't separate. I saw him last year blow by Jamel Dean, and Jamel Dean's a burner. That
Right.
guy runs really fast. And he, like the last game of the season against the Buccaneers, there was a deep pass to London. London was like 10 yards past this kid.
Yep.
And yeah, it was an underthrown ball, and it should have been pass interference because Jamel Dean got roasted, like absolutely roasted. So London can get behind guys. Is he just going to say? Could he just sit there and basically call his shot, say, "Hey, I'm a go route. Let's see if you can catch up." No, he's not going to do that. But he's a guy that, with his route running and what have you, he's a guy that can get over the top and beat you. But Scotty Miller's a guy that can do that and say, "Hey, I'm gonna go there. Let's race."
And then,
You know,
let's see who can get there first. Come on.
yeah. So if you can just make them think about it, make them worry about it, then I think that's the best scenario with the Scotty Miller. And yeah, if he can give you the 40 receptions, maybe like I said, anywhere between 5 to 7 touchdowns is spectacular production out of Miller if you can get all that.
Right.
So,
I'm with you. And I think, to me, wide receiver and possibly safety is the only 2 positions that I see that they might add to before we get to camp. But outside of Corey Davis, I don't really see them going after really anybody. So that's the one that everybody's looking for. We're waiting on, in a sense, whether he gets cut. The Jets brought in Randall Cobb, so that's like yet another move towards possibly getting rid of Corey Davis. And if that's the case, I would not be surprised one bit if he ends up here in Atlanta.
yep.
Well, that's our early roster talk. We're gonna have plenty of time to break all this stuff down. I figured, I wanted to get in here and really just hash it out with you, as far as where we see the holes at after the bulk of free agency, after the draft. Where do we see the holes? How do we see this stuff shaking out? And I think we've done that well here tonight. As always, Falcons fans, y'all can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Grim1128, GRIMM1128. Jonathan?
At Jonathan M. Holder, come by, say hi.
There you go. We'll be back live on Tuesday to chop it up with y'all. Y'all definitely need to bring your questions or comments, because we're moving into the slow period, so to speak. So it's going to be a lot more conversations with chat, just a lot more chopping it up with y'all. So bring your comments and your questions, because we look forward to seeing.
Bring your thinking caps.
That's right. Bring your thinking caps. But yeah. So like I said, keep your eye on the channel, and we'll be back live next Tuesday. And as always, Falcons, what you got?
Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, hit the like button, all
that good stuff helps us. Helps us keep going, helps us keep producing this content for y'all. So yeah, do that for us. We appreciate it. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.
Rise up.